Hello and welcome. Today we're out in London, Finsbury Skate Park. It's quite early in the morning, so we've got it to ourselves and we're doing 10 mini ramp tricks that you didn't know for absolute beginners. So let's get into it. So kicking things off with one of the most basic ones, that is rock to fakie. Now the rock is basically just the board going up onto the coping and doing like a seesaw rocking motion. I'll show you with my hands. You come up facing normal, put the front wheels over the coping, you put a tiny bit of weight on the front foot so the board rocks. That's why it's called a rock to fakie, because it's like a seesaw. And then you just put the weight back onto the back foot, lift the front wheels over and go back down. I've got a full video on how to cheat this with absolutely no stress whatsoever, so check that out if you haven't. But the gist of it is just front wheels over, front wheels back, and just do it further and further up the ramp until you get to a point where you're comfortable at any point, and then slowly edge the wheels over the coping, just like this. Lift them back up over. You've done the most basic version of the rock to fakie. And then finally, to complete it in its fullest form, all you need to do is put a bit of weight onto that front foot as the wheels go over the coping and then lift it back up over. This is scary at first. Find the smallest ramp you can, practice on that, and then work your way up to something with a nice big coping, and it'll look something like this. That is trick number one. Alright, trick number two is axle stall, also known as 50-50 if you do it moving. But basically the gist of it is you come up, you turn off the back truck into 50-50, which is basically just both trucks on the coping at once, and then just turn yourself back in, facing forward that way. I'll show you it in its fullest form. Both trucks on and in. Now this one you can actually practice first on a ramp without a coping, that might be easier, so something like this. The hardest part about the axle stall is bringing it back into the ramp, but obviously I'm going to show you how to get your trucks onto the coping first. So we're going to pretend this line here is the coping. Now most ramps have a line at the top of them that differentiate the flat from the ramp, so use that as your point of reference. Right, I'm going to go up and turn around. Turn your shoulders 90 degrees and then go back in. And then what you want to do is as you come up to the top bit, turn into it and turn back in. You can practice it as low down as you want, so it's just turn the shoulders 90 degrees, you'll stop, turn the hips, and then you're back into the ramp. And then by this point, you're already facing back into the ramp, so you just bend your knees and then lean into it as you turn, and boom, that's your axle stall. Boom, that's the most basic version of your axle stall. Now you got to take it to the coping. It's the exact same thing, just with a bit more speed. A great way to practice the scariest bit of it, which is the dropping back into the ramp off the coping, is to find something like this. Anything that's raised off the ground, like a ledge or a bench or just a block, stick your wheels on it like you would for an axle stall, and then turn out the same way you would if you were going to go into the ramp. And lift up the front wheels, turn those hips and shoulders, and you're golden. Just like that. Right, so now that you're ready to take it to the coping, just do exactly the same motion. When you're up there, do not hesitate. If you hesitate too long, you're going to get scared and you're going to bottle it out. So just turn those hips and shoulders 90 degrees to get into the coping, and then do the same thing while bending your knees back into the ramp, just like this. And that is how to axle stall. So trick number three is a rock and roll. Now this is basically an evolution to the rock to fakie, except this time instead of going up and coming down backwards, we're going to go up, put the front wheels over, and then turn around and come back normally. It'll look a little something like this. This is actually probably a little less scary than the rock to fakie, and if you can do a kick turn, then you've basically got this one in the bag already. So you can just go up, lift the front wheels over like the coping's there, and then turn around like your kick turn. If you want to practice the turn, just start stationary on the floor, point your body one way, and then follow with the hips like this. That's your kick turn. Now we're going to do it on the ramp. It's actually a little bit easier on the ramp because you've got the momentum of coming back down normally, and it will look just like this. Once you've got that, simple as put them front wheels over the coping and then just kick turn out of it. It's as simple as that. Scary, I know, but very simply done. Over the coping and back. Just like that. Remember, when you go into rock fakie, you're going to already want to turn your body facing back down to the ramp so your hips can surely follow. Watch my upper body and then how my lower body follows it straight after. Copy that form and you'll have it in no time. So trick number 4 is a feeble. This is basically like the axle stool, but the front truck doesn't go onto the coping. So what you're going to do, and this is actually probably a bit easier than an axle stool because you have to turn less into it. So what you're going to do is you're going to come up, turn that like you would for an axle stool, but this time your front wheels, they're going to sit just to the left of the coping like this. So the back wheels stay locked on so you can balance on the coping, but the front wheels don't quite make it to the coping, and then you turn it. A bit easier than axle stool if you ask me. It's exactly the same motion, except this time when we get onto the coping, the weight is predominantly on our back foot rather than both feet evenly for the axle stool. So keep an eye on where I stop on my turn and how I get back in. This one I think is actually probably the easiest trick that you can do on the coping with your trucks. Just remember, turn the body 90 degrees, but don't quite make it to the coping on that front truck, and then turn your way back in. Other than that, it's exactly the same motions and techniques and ways to practice that you do with the axle stool. Take it to a small ramp first, work your way up, then the feeble is in the bag. Right, trick number 5, 5-0. That wasn't intentional, it just happened. So a 5-0 is basically when you go up onto the coping with just the back truck this time. So instead of doing the feeble, where you would come up and your trucks would be like this, one on, one off, a 5-0 is a similar situation, but this time you have that front one lifted into the air, like manual on the coping. So it's basically like a manual grind, and then you just turn it. Now this is one that is actually easier to do on the coping because when you put the back wheel onto the coping, it sort of locks you in place if you have your weight on it right. If you try to do it on something like that ramp without the coping, it's actually going to be a bit harder because you haven't got the coping there to lock you in. So watch how, as I turn around into it, same sort of motion as the axle, same as the feeble. This time though, you got to lift that front foot up as you come round and hold it there for a millisecond and then go back in. This is probably one of the harder ones on today's list. You guys are learning from the best, so good luck to you. Egos aside, let's try and do it. Oh, almost stacked. If that's a lesson in to be humble, take it from me. In its fullest form, that I keep saying for some reason today, it's gonna be like this. The way that you keep it in place is that when you come up, you have your weight on this back foot here. So if you'll notice, the wheel is on the outside of the coping and this wheel remains on the inside of the ramp. That's so you can turn in easier. But if you have your weight here, so you have your weight on your back foot predominantly, balance it like that and then turn in. The wheel, this wheel at the back is what's gonna hold you in place. It's gonna be quite scary at first, but trust it. If you keep your wheel there and you have enough weight on it, it's not gonna slip out, you'll be totally fine, and then just turn your way in. If you're feeling a bit sketched out by this one and maybe not as confident, try practicing your manuals first, because the better you get at just balancing on them back two wheels, the easier and more second nature this is gonna become. Anyway, that's 5 done, on to trick number 6. Now that we're halfway, I wanna ask you from the bottom of my heart, if you guys have learned something from me and you wanna support my content, consider becoming a member because I've put the prices down to 99 cents a month. If 10 people do that off this video, I'll do a skateboard giveaway in the next one. Thank you. So now we're getting into the slightly more obscure tricks. This is a rock and roll body varial. So what you're gonna wanna do is get your babes standing there. Now the lowdown for this trick is just like our rock fakie, but we're gonna switch our stance halfway through. So if you got regular, you're gonna jump, turn to goofy and come back down. So imagine it like this, right? You ride up, front wheels over the coping, jump like this, and then you're gonna go back down that way. This one is actually way easier than it seems. It's scary, I know, but it's one of them ones where if you can commit to it and just get over that fear process, you're gonna be way better off. 90% of all these tricks are just, can I do it? Or just, can I commit to it? The movements and forms are easy, the commitment is the hard part. So keep that in mind. Some tricks you wanna try, and then think about it, which is the mini ramp. And other tricks you want to think, and then try, which is stuff like kickflips, tray flips, and all the flip tricks, more technical stuff. So keep that in mind. So I'm going to give myself a big run up for this one because you want to make sure you're comfortable with your stance as you ride up. The classic turnaround. Rock fakie and then switch, back down. Now this one is probably on the same sort of level as the 5-0 trick. While they are beginner mini ramp tricks and they do seem a bit harder than they are, it's all in the commitment. This is one of the ones where it's good to practice it on a smaller ramp as well. So you see this, like we talked about before, with the flat bit and the ramp separated, we're gonna practice there. front wheels over, switch, and then ride back down. Now, if you want to make it a bit safer and less sketchy for yourself, when you ride back down, you're going to want to lift those back wheels up over the coping, just in case you have a fear of getting hung up. It never happens, but it can be a bit more of a confidence booster if you do this. So, front wheels over, switch, and then lift up on the way back down. That way you're guaranteed to not hang up. Now let's take it to the coping. Only further piece of advice before you take it to the coping would be to make sure that when you go into the rock fakie, your feet are nice and spread apart. You want to have them at least, I'd say, a good foot apart, just so your balance position is wide so that you can easily land in the same sort of position. The closer you have your feet together, the harder it is to balance in tricks, but the better you get at skating the mini ramp, the closer you'll be able to have your feet together without having to worry. So just keep them spread apart first, and then just practice until you feel more comfortable. One more time. Nice spread apart. Back in you go. That's number 6. All right, so the next one is a tail stool. So assuming you can drop in, because obviously you're not trying to learn all these mini ramp tricks before you can drop in, that would be silly. Anyway. Tail stool is basically just coming up into this drop-in position from riding fakie and then going back in. This one is so easy, but the difficult part is the timing. So obviously the technique of it is really basic. Just come up, put the weight onto the back foot, and then drop back in like normal. But it ain't that easy. The most common mistake with this one is I see people putting their weight onto the board a bit too early. So they'll come up and they'll put their weight onto the board like here, and thus they'll slide back down the ramp. So all you want to do with this one is just make sure you focus on keeping that timing right. Once you get to about here, with the momentum of moving backwards, you put that weight onto there, and then you can just drop back in like normal. Tail stool is all in timing. Practice it on the smaller ramps if you need to. It's one of them ones that you can really break down. And that is trick number 7. Alright, trick number 8 is another variation of rock fakie, and this is providing you can ollie. So if you haven't watched that video yet, go back, watch that first, come back to this one, and we're doing ollie to rock fakie. It's a real simple variation. If you want to practice it in its most basic form, do ollies to fakie first, and then slowly work your way up the ramp. Start low, and get higher as you want. I would say it's actually easier to do it into rock fakie than it is to fakie, but it seems easier to do it without touching the coping first, so practice that before. And from the start of this video, you already know how to do the rock fakie movement, so as long as you can ollie into it, once you've landed into it, it's exactly the same motion. It should look something like this. That's trick number 8, on to number 9. Trick number 9, no stall revert. Another one of them ones where people look at it and think, wow, that looks really difficult. But to do the revert out of it is actually easier than just doing a regular no stall. So this is, again, one that you can practice on these smaller ramps. I'll show you how it goes down first. Obviously with the no stall, opposite to the tail stall, right up normal, put the nose down, and then revert back in. If you want to practice the revert, go up and just do that first. And like I said, the revert out of the nose stool is actually way easier than just doing the nose stool and coming back down fakie, and way less scary. So, front wheel flipping and then turn around and way back in. More an intermediate trick, I know, but I've seen so many beginners learn this faster than they can do stuff like Smiths, 5-0s and that, so it must be a beginner trick in some aspect. Basically, what you're going to do is put that weight onto the front foot as you go up, and then release the weight from the front onto the back, and turn yourself around. You can start quite low down the ramp for practice, and then slowly work your way up. So you can put the nose down here, and then turn around like a kick turn. And once you've got the confidence to hit the copings, go up, put that nose onto the coping, and then do the kick turn back in, and you've got the nose stool revert. Lovely, one more to go. And finally, we've probably got one of the easiest ones in the entire video, and that's the fakie rock. So what you do on this one is just ride up and fakie, put the back wheels over the coping, and then ride back down facing normal. Some people actually find this easier than the rock to fakie, which is understandable because you're not going back down the ramp backwards. But anyway, it's gonna look like this. So riding backwards, back wheels over, and bring it back in. A common thing for this trick is to not even rock the board when you go back in. So it's just simply riding over with the back wheels and then riding back in. Again, like I said, with the rock fakie, body varial, and then back in, you can lift the back wheels back over to get rid of any fear of hanging up, but the chances of that happening are so minimal anyway. You don't really need to worry about it, but if you want to, do it like this. So you just put a bit of weight on the nose as you come back in, and it brings the back wheels back over.